Hello and welcome to Warblog. Today I'm going to look at Operation Kropduif. Kropduif. Angola. I'm sort of doing this one because it's an odd map, and in a nutshell, I'm not very happy with the map, but it's sort of how it is. It's hard to explain, and some maps are really interesting and exciting, and you think, oh, that looks interesting, and you can sort of apply your mind to thinking, and this one's not. But the thing is, it is actually an interesting scenario, so I'm hopefully going to sort of give it a little more, not so much credibility, but a bit more oomph by trying to get maybe a decent video for it. Essentially, the operation is to, let me just put this out. It's essentially to take out Eheke, which is sort of here, and they divide it up into Eheke 1 and Eheke 2. Eheke 1, Eheke 2. And so what they do, essentially, the 32nd Battalion, who I did the last scenario on, they basically enter Angola, and their objective is to take that. Whilst at the same time, this special forces unit lands, it's planned, and it calls it a DZ. So I don't know what DZ means, as opposed to LZ, which is a landing zone. They're supposed to land here, and it's quite interesting because they say, oh, they land there and then they head at 238 degrees. It's a compass bearing. So they land here and then they head in this direction. But the thing is, because it's the Angolan bush, and it's dark and it's featureless, no mountains or anything that they can sort of get bearings on, when they land here, they don't really realise, and so they carry on marching in this direction, and it's only when they get to about there that they realise, and then they come down here. However, there's a bit more involved than that. Essentially, there are, in the write-up, it basically states that there are 2 bases. So there's, and then all these are Chanas. This is actually Chana, Hakonde, Chana, Biguita. I don't know what Chana means. I guess I could look it up. But anyway, they basically got to take out these 2 bases. Now the thing is, when I look at the map, and I don't think I have the map in front of me, so much so that I'm not really going to try and show it, because I would spend the next 20 minutes looking through all my open tabs. Let me pause the video and see if I can find it, because basically it sort of shows that the flow of what happened was more like this, and then like that. So it's like a bad golfer, he wants to go there. But the thing is, the write-up says they take Chana, Nutalala, which is actually over there. So presumably they sort of, what I might imagine is that they work on a broad front that goes this way, that also encompasses that and encompasses that. But when they get to Chana Tofima, which we know is here, they essentially encounter some of these SWAPO units, I think, SWAPO units. So it doesn't work in draw mode, but when they get there, they retreat towards Mamundi, which is there, and they basically follow through. So that could possibly work if they're working on this sort of front here like that. But anyway, en route, they come across 2 deserted bases. I don't know where they are, but so that's what these are. So essentially they spring through this way, with this one being, I don't know why it's over there, because the arrows show it being like that, as I said. They come across some resistance there, they chase this unit up, as it runs off towards Mahmoudi and finding these 2 bases. So that explains these 4 objectives here. Now, when they get to sort of up here, I can't quite remember, a bit vague on the details, but there's another engagement, or Chana Gulf is something that they plan to attack. So I'm presuming it's sort of like another base. And essentially, yeah, these 3 units, so after they've gone through Chana Gulf, and after they've sort of taken this, which is probably just really a small village or something, the write-up will probably be a bit clearer as to what that is. They are attacked, the 32nd Battalion are attacked from the northeast, northwest and southeast, and that's what these units are for. So these ones, and these ones, now they're sort of wildly over there for just so that they're not in the way when you go up to Chana Gulf. So after Chana Gulf, essentially they get attacked by these 3 units, and then as they're approaching, after they've finished with that, and they're sort of, I think it's probably rested for the day, preparing. This is where it gets quite vague from my point of view, interpreting the write-up. As they're preparing for Eheke 2, this is the 32nd Battalion, which are all the units that are down here. As they're sort of preparing for that, they're attacked by. Hang on, no, these are the units. So this is to do with Chana Gulf. So ignore what I said there. Basically, these 3 units attack, so they've got their rocket support there, so they attack there. There's basically a before they can attack Eheke 2, they're attacked themselves, and obviously they win. And then basically what happens that they prepare, essentially once they're sort of around this point or somewhere around here, they say, okay, well, we're in position to take out Eheke 2, and so then you land your special forces either there or there, wherever you want to. I mean, there's the historic, that's the planned, it doesn't matter, but they go for Eheke 1, and they go into Eheke 1, and I think they lose about 7 men, and you know, there's quite a bit of fighting. But when the 32nd Battalion go into Eheke 2, they find it deserted, and it's little things like that that you just can't model in a game like this. You know, for example, you know, I think Chana Gulf was deserted, deserted base. I think Nutalala was deserted, and that's why there's no sort of units there. And so then they go up and help the special forces there, and after that they basically just leave and head back. The only thing being worth of note is that when they do leave, what you'll notice is that these special force units are motorised with 6, and the special forces that are sort of air transported are only a 3, so they'll be you'll be limited on that. So essentially, once you start to look at it, it's actually quite an interesting scenario, but the geography of it and the map just doesn't lend itself to being that interesting. The link is actually in with the description and the write-up, and so, you know, I sort of wanted to sort of maybe do that to do this video, and maybe, you know, add another dimension that will add to the depth of information that will perhaps bring this scenario to life. I'm not going to do too many more sort of from this sort of area immediately, but if you look at that, I think War in Angola site, there's quite a lot of all the operations, or many of the operations, including some that didn't happen, are actually written up in enough detail to sort of make these, you know, to make these sorts of scenarios. But the only thing to sort of add to that is that we can't. What I've just described there was a sort of a course of events that are very specific to what happened. You know, the historic situation, but from a sort of a more generic perspective, I mean, it was an operation to move north, to take out, as I said, this known sort of base, and there was an even bigger one further to the north, but this is the one they're trying to take out, and on the way take out a couple of other bases. And so you might say, well, I would have done it a different way. You know, I might have gone this way, you know, because you could take that one, then that one, and completely avoid Chana Gulf. You might say, well, I'm going to actually land in Tonga, and then head due west, as opposed to a compass bearing, or land much closer. You might want to say, well, we're going to, you could do it some other way. And again, I think another thing that's maybe worth bearing in mind when trying to perhaps conceptualize the variations in the historic narrative versus, say, a more generic approach to the situation. These units could have been anywhere. So as the SWAPO player, you might sort of say, well, I'm going to actually dig in at Eheke, or I'm going to use these units to do something else. So the play for, especially on the SWAPO side, is very sort of down to you, sort of dynamically, whether or not you sort of do this, whether you move down here, whether you move these units over here. You can. These are your resources, and they're just plonked there as a guide or an estimation to help you either support, let's say, a simulation or reenactment of the historic narrative, or just sort of explore sort of a completely different way of doing things. And I think the thing to possibly worth bearing in mind, is that it is more of a sort of a guerrilla type war. Now, I haven't given them insurgent units. I've just given these sort of fairly realistic, not so much realistic, but more solid companies, which they were sort of moving around in. I mean, that they were sort of company formations, battalions, and they were fighting like battalions and retreating, like regular formations, as opposed to in advance acting like insurgents and guerrillas, although that's exactly what they were. They were very sort of loosely formatted, structured as sort of insurgents and guerrillas, but not quite like ISIS, I don't think. So I've given them regular units to make them a little bit tougher. I mean, for example, I think when they attack here, just before they get to Eheke, they're only attacked by about 30 men with rocket launchers, and the engagement lasts about 10 minutes or something along those lines. So it's definitely worth reading the narrative on the other site if you can open it, because I think you have to pay to become a member. You have to sign up in order to get access to the full descriptions, and I signed up, but there's nothing onerous about it. You just enter an email and a password and you get in. So I don't think I even had to verify my email address. So it's quite interesting. So again, just to reiterate, you could do what you want with this, and because it's really just sort of an incursion across this border from Southwest Africa and Namibia into Angola, it's not so it's a particular strategy to it. So you could sort of say, well, I could form these up into one big group and really give them a hard time, or you could sort of possibly say, well, we're going to try and play it more historically. I mean, you can do what you like from that point of view, but it's sort of what this is depicting is, I think, what is probably going to be a common theme in the sort of the background to a lot of these operations, in that these SADF, South African Defence Forces, are coming across the border to hit these sort of enemy bases over in Angola, which was probably because they were coming across into Southwest Africa and killing people and laying mines and all sorts of things. So they were constantly going over the border to take out these bases, and it was often in response to farmers being murdered and etc. that they were actually, the government would say, okay, well, we're going to do this because 6 farmers have been killed, or we're going to do that. And so it's just going across the border. So again, what you're picking up here and learning from is really the fact that they're coming out across the border. It's sort of the same thing with the other, but it's a real operation, and so and I don't think there's anything noteworthy about it other than the fact that they sort of got lost a little bit up here. So again, you can sort of pretty much do what you want, and there's no sort of, what I'm saying is that there's no direct strategy, or there's no sort of like, well, should you sort of defend here at this hill or form a line? You could run away with everyone. Why not? You don't want to encounter these special forces, but you might sort of look at the mass and say, well, I can take them out, and that's a very ahistoric way to be thinking about it. But again, it's so you can take this whatever way you want, but it's remarkable from the point of view that the map is, it's completely featureless and rather uninspiring, but the situation and the course of events and the historical background to it is actually pretty interesting. So anyway, I'm just going to give it a quick twirl, so to speak. So it's costing me 1.5 to move. I'm going to try and head this way because I want to try and keep that sort of arrow line that happened historically. I wonder why it's suddenly taken me. More to move into there. So you've got 6 movement. Moving into there gives me 4.9. So that's 1.1. So presumably that should be. Yep. Yep, he's got 3.8. He's only got 1. Doesn't make any sense. .7, 2.7, 1.6. I guess I have actually moved. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just going to leave them in a straight line like that because I don't want to get too far away from my artillery, which for some reason has not gone as fast as I might have hoped it should. Maybe I should look into that, but certainly not right now. Okay, so here, well, we're going to leave them in there because they're sort of probably oblivious to what's about to happen. Here, I think they basically, this unit is going to attack the Battalion 32 when it gets towards Chana Gulf. So they're going to sort of wait there. The reason they're there is so that this unit can sort of come up this way and then they can attack. And these units here essentially are really there to attack when they get to about there, or near to Eheke 2. I think this one, in actual fact, attacks them when they get to Chana Gulf, and then this one, northeast, northwest, southeast, northwest, northeast, southeast, are the ones that attack when they're there. So this won't be there, so they'll come to Chana Gulf and then a couple of days later or a day later they'll come down here. When they get to there, by that time you would have moved this unit into attacking position, and so those 3 units attack when they're sort of about there, and then they run away and etc. So I think that the rest of the story fits into place. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave them where they are and leave everything else where they are. Now, maybe I misread it. It's 2.5. So 2.5. So that would leave. If I moved it 1, so that makes sort of sense. But now we can start out. So what they are is actually a 81mm mortar group. And after this battle, it was advised that the 32 Battalion be equipped with much larger caliber howitzers or anti-tank weapons, or basically larger ordnance, not larger, bigger, heavy weapons. But this is what they've got here, and so we're going to start our assault there. .8, that's quite nice. Now we can pretty much move, I think, 3. We've got 1, 2, we'll start from there, don't we? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We could get 4, but it doesn't really matter. So what I'm actually going to do, and I should have moved my artillery before I fire, because now I can't move it. Oh well, I'm going to move it. I'm going to attack here. I could have moved there, there, and there, but then he would have probably retreated there. This way, at least he's going to sort of at least retreat, can retreat towards Mahmudi. That's if I win the battle, but I think I should be. Because of special forces, I'll probably end up with 45 versus 3, so it's going to be about a 7 to 1. Maybe there are only really infantry, they're just elite infantry, so you know, this is a hangover from the previous one where they needed some extra firepower, but they're not even dug in yet, so it's probably a 7 to 1. Yep, okay, so they haven't run away, but we can maybe assume that the remnants of those elements are running away. We've still got some movement, so we'll get into Chana Tofima. Maybe I shouldn't have been so zealous in that direction. So we'll take Chana Nutalala. We'll assume that they're running away, and we're going to get these deserted bases in due course as well. Do we have any more movement? No. Okay. They're not going to do anything. They're all going to get dug in now, which is going to make them a little tougher soon. So, the excitement mounts. Okay, they're not going to do anything. I wonder why that one didn't get destroyed. Okay, move it right up to slowest. They're not going to do anything. Ah, I know why. Yes, okay. It's a bit of a mistake on my part. It's now green, which means I've captured it, not destroyed it. I have to actually flag them up, whether they're a capture or a destroy objective, and so obviously I haven't done that, so I'll have to go back in now. I can't really change that now, so that has actually been destroyed, so we've got that. It's not red, it's green. Okay, which is the colour here. Okay, so we're heading up to Chana Gulf now. And SWAPO is not going to do anything. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Okay, I don't know what's happening because I can't see any of these units yet. There's many miles between hexes, so that's a bit of role play effort there. Again, something like this, you could sort of say, okay, well, we should have some hidden movement, and if you were playing this with two people, you could have these as hidden movement units. But, you know, special rules would sort of dictate that, well, they're not going to become activated until you get to Chana Gulf, which we've just done now. So now, obviously, the rockets are moving a lot slower, but what we'll have now is sort of saying, well, this unit here, the SWAPO unit, can now activate, because his conditions entering Chana Gulf are now valid. And again, this shouldn't be green; there should be a destroy one. So I'll have to sort that out as well. One of the reasons I do the playtesting, so to speak. But now we're basically going to attack, and to be quite honest, again, these units are probably a bit big, but there's only one unit in there, and it's going to be a 1 to 2. We can't use these rockets yet because we haven't really activated them, but we've got no movement left, so that's that. We can assume that there is sort of like some conflict, because that's what historically happens. So they're firing at each other, but we can't really reflect that, and the odds will never be that great anyway. So, but the 32 Battalion have now achieved their objective there, and so we're going to attack it. Move into there, and again I've used the artillery before firing. Okay, we managed to destroy those units, but I don't want to move too far away from my artillery, although these units won't become active until I've sort of arrived there, but I can at least try starting to get there. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything. Gone back to sort of keep pace with the rockets. However, we're now in position for the SWAPO units to become active, although we should have done this last turn. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to end that turn. We're going to pretend that we're waiting for our rockets. Mortars, sorry, keep calling them rockets. Now they've been attacked. 0.6, 0.4, 1.2, and okay. Well, we're going to fire back on the rockets. They are entrenched, so they have been damaged, and we're just going to end that turn there. Now this guy can move there, but he won't have any movement, which is a pain. And he won't have any movement, but we can at least carry out some attrition. Oh, that was not what I wanted to do. That was what I wanted to do with the attrition. I wanted to fire the rockets as rockets. No, that was rubbish. Okay, so that's a complete failure. Okay, so we're now active. I think we're going to attack this way without going for any surrounds, because I don't want to split things up too much at all, really. 7 to 1, and a DR. And we've still got some movement on some of these units. And again, I use the mortars there as just regular units. Well, that was a DE, and we've still got movement. So this is 32 Battalion in their finest moment, just fighting off 3 units in one turn, killing 2 of them. Okay, well now they're actually going to run away. But what I'm going to do, which is, well, I'm going to actually, now I'm basically going to sit there and prepare for, now I've got 2.6 depression on that, so I want to rest here. I'm going to land on the Special Forces at the actual LZ. Press the button. Okay. So there we are. Look at that, they're entrenched. I'll have to sort that out. That shouldn't happen because they've been sat there so long. Yeah. So there's another little thing I can sort out, iron out. They shouldn't be dug in or entrenched because they've been sitting down here doing nothing. It's sort of every turn it goes through, it's been increasing their dug in factor. Anyway, not a biggie. I can sort that out. I just have to remember to sort it out because I don't think I want to do it right now. I'm a bit busy and tired. Okay, and so we're going to follow through, and I might change these to just put them as regular troops because they're clearly really tough. Because we're probably going to do a DE, so there's virtually no well, in actual fact, I'm so certain I can destroy them. There's no point in even using the mortars. DE, yep, with a 1 die roll, and I've still got movement. I shouldn't have really done that because now I've lost the historic. He's gone into a zone of control, so he won't be able to move. He's stuffed. Okay. Well, historically, they sort of sat here, and these people tried to come down here on compass bearing 238. They're going to sit there because we don't know what's happening. We achieved our objective, and we shouldn't have done it this early. We should have been in a position so that we do it now. So they go there and think, hang on, we're going the wrong way. And they're not going to move there this turn because their no movement would be finished, so wait till next turn, at which point we should still be waiting to attack Eheke 2. And now we go in, and as was historically defined, and this is obviously Eheke 2, so when these are not available to us right at this moment because we've got to wait until we hear the gunfire. They're going to be at 15 versus 7, so they're not even going to get. So they're going to get a 2 to 1. They possibly get a bonus because of their special forces, but they're dug in. So this might be a 1 to 1. So this is going to be the first tough battle of the game. 1 to 1. Defender retreats. Well, that's because they're the special forces. You see, it's all fitting together as sort of like as how it possibly happened. But they had a tough time, so maybe they shouldn't. It should have been an exchange really to reflect the historic narrative. So now what we can do. We can hear that, but not until next turn. and I think they're going to run away just because they're just so heavily outnumbered and gunned, etc. You know, we're not trying to sort of do it to the last counter, so to speak. And then the South African Defence Force say, hey, listen to that, so let's go over there and save them. And they all move into Eheke. And he's not got enough movement. And destroy Eheke. SWAPO continue to retreat. And then the South African Defence Forces essentially move south. Like that. Now obviously they're limited to 2 a turn because they've got the Special Forces, which are just foot units, and the mortar unit, which is clearly moving a lot slower through bush, which is what this green stuff is. So that's that, really. And obviously these should be black, they should be destroyed features. They're sort of running away. Don't worry too much about that. And they are heading towards the border. And that's the story. I hope you enjoyed that. I know it's not the easiest thing to portray, but one of the things that I'm hoping to achieve with Warblog, I won't move any further than all of that. One of the things I'm hoping to achieve with Warblog, is a presentation of little stories like that in scenarios where this is a prime example. There's nothing particular about the map. It's probably one of the most awkward maps that I've ever done because there are no features other than the border. But as I said, historically, now that you've seen me do it, you could play it in other ways. You could just say, oh, okay, I just want to make this engaging. Now, what I think I'm going to do to make it possibly more engaging is change this from Special Forces, other than the Special Forces, because the 32nd were an infantry battalion, but they were just an elite infantry battalion. And Special Forces, they get ×3 multiplier when they're attacking. So when these 15 times 3 is 45 against 3 is silly odds. They're just going to eliminate everything. Whereas I think, even with 5-15 against 3, that's still 5 to 1. That's still pretty good odds. But once you start to get damage, or they're dug in, or they get you can only bring 2 to bear. It's going to be a little more compelling, I think. So I'll make that change, and that's one of the reasons I do these videos. But essentially, now that you've seen it sort of played through, and if you could, especially if you read the information on that other site where I got this from, you can sort of almost see how the arrows, they go like this. Like that, and then this one, obviously it lands there. Goes like that, and then like that, and then they join up together. It doesn't say how they come out, but you can sort of see how that works, that sort of strategic flow in this way. So how they got Chana and Nutalala, because it doesn't seem to be on the arrow. You would have thought, well, maybe when they said northwest, well, maybe I just read it wrong, but you would have thought, well, if that was in northeast of Tofima, then it might be a little more understandable, etc., etc. But now that you can see, that sort of gameplay and how these, I think it's interesting that they use Special Forces in that way, dropping them in with helicopters. That's a very much sort of, this is, was it 1977? Let's just have a look. 77, I guessed it right. Look, it will clearly. I'm not saying they copied Vietnam. It's just standard military practice by that time, but it's only 10 years after Vietnam, so the use of helicopters in that way and airborne troops is probably I think, well, not probably, it's interesting. It's interesting to see that happening in 1977, which is before the main sort of Soviet experience in Afghanistan, when they had a tough time because of surface-to-air missiles. but they're fighting a sort of, relatively unsophisticated, sort of more guerrilla-based army, but it's not quite insurgent army, but probably doesn't have that sort of surface-to-air capability, that might have precluded that type of operation. But so I hope you sort of think, well, that's interesting. I can see you've brought this rather, bland, featureless map to life, and I think one of the things that kind of, I don't know, it's because it's a difficult map. I feel that this is a significant, worthwhile challenge to try and make it become interesting and sort of, well, I can understand this scenario now. But what I'm saying is, when they landed here, the difficulty they had, as I've already said, is that they had nothing to focus on. So there's no hills here. There's no major rivers that they could have walked into. I mean, they could have walked. How far would they have gone before they realised that they'd gone too far? And I think it's this scenario, because I've only done 2, and I mean, certainly in the previous one that I did, I don't want to take too much more time, but Savate, they missed Savate. They marched too far north. They came down the river and they went straight past it and got out their boats here, and they had to row all the way up, rowing in their boats up rapids just to get back there. So I think one of the things that is actually, again, double interesting about this whole sort of Angola period, and probably the same with a lot of other periods, but particularly with this, is that people get lost in the bush. It's quite hard to negotiate, and that's quite hard to sort of model. And I mean, when people play strategy games, they never play, oh, I've got lost. I mean, how do you model that? And I know a lot of people will model command and supply and orders, sort of, well, we give an order to a unit, but it doesn't follow that order, or it does something else. A lot of people put rules in to replicate all that, and I just don't think you can do enough rules to replicate every single variation in historic narratives in that way. Units getting lost. But I think when they came up to Chana Gulf, they thought it was going to take them 3 hours, and it took them 6 hours. So the planning of these things was significant. Their objectives, when they got there was no one there. In here, it was empty. I think in the previous one, Savate, they found a military hospital, and there was no one there. When they got to here, they found one of these bases had a large stash, or it might be Chana, Tofima, had a large stash of RPG-7s that they got, and several vehicles and things. So it's a bit like a game where you run around and you're trying to find treasure chests in certain villages, and you go here and there's nothing here. You go here and you've got a +5 Sherman tank or something. Obviously it's not that sort of game, but the intelligence of where these places are, is such that you can land in the wrong place, you can go straight past them, you can find it takes a lot longer to get there than you thought, etc., etc. And so putting all that together is sort of, it just adds, I think, to the fuller picture, as opposed to just sort of having full godlike command of the units and knowing what's there. And again, we had to sort of pretend that we couldn't move these early SWAPO units when they were there and there to reflect the sort of the surprise attack on the 32 Battalion at that point when they were around here. We can only really do that without actually having a full set of complex rules to make that happen, by pretending. So when you sort of, I think when you put all the pieces together, you find that this period, just like in many others, has its own interesting permutations and variables and features and details that that all add up to sort of like a darker, richer picture of course of history that isn't particularly well documented. I mean, for example, I've been struggling. I really like this period, this location, for a few reasons. I think the weather just makes it more appealing. Nice hot, sort of African desert. They always look like they've got a tan and having a good time, as opposed to sort of other places. I mean, I guess Middle East, you could say that, but But the point I'm trying to get to is always been of interest to me, but at the same time, I didn't know anything about it, and I've been struggling with trying to get the Qt scenarios. I've only done one. There's 3 of them. I've done modular, I think, and there's Harper or Hammer, or there's a couple more. But I just, and then I started to think, well, I did think that the Bush Wars was Rhodesia, so I started a couple of little scenarios from Rhodesia, and it's really only in the last 2 or 3 weeks when I suddenly started to look at this, and digging a little deeper behind the Qt scenario, trying to find something. I realised that the Bush War took 23 years. And it's just that singular fact that it took 23 years. You think, wow, a lot must have happened, more than just Qt, and it's just trying to dig into all of that, find out what. Because at the moment, I know nothing. I've done Savate and this, which is Operation Kropduif, and so this could be relatively mundane. Some of them, I think Singa, I know that's Israeli, which I've also been reading up on recently. But I think there are a few that are going to be more substantial, more war gamey, so to speak. But anyway, I hope you find that interesting. Remember, if you want to have a blast on this yourself, you can. You can play it online when you're a member, when you signed up. You don't have to. You can just indulge in the videos when I make them, or just look at them afresh on the website. Always plenty to see. But if you do, you just sign up, pressing all the little buttons, and you can play it yourself. So anyway, I'll speak to you later. Cheers, mate.